today we're going to be talking about an issue that's been topical this week, which is the issue of entrepreneurship in this country. But before we get to that, as usual, we shall introduce what we're drinking this evening. Gentlemen, what are we having?
Because we celebrated Africa Day this week, I thought it would be a good idea to showcase a great product from the continent. And the chocolate block is African Bordeaux blend. It's very good. In fact, you're the one who introduced me to it. And I remember it was at a dinner where we managed to have 2 bottles of these and still split the bill 3 ways with Tinashe. Was drinking mostly Coke.
You have learned well, son.
A very simple choice, Pepsi Light.
And?
Ice.
Okay, your choice. I had a bit of a tough time last week with Profaro's choice of whiskey, so I brought my own. I think it's one of the most underrated blends of Scotch. It's Jewels, and in this particular case, it's a white label, which is a 12-year mature version of it. I highly recommend it. Easy on the tongue, and as an accountant, very good value for money. Now, shifting to the topic of the day, gentlemen. Strive Masiwa has made the rich list in the UK, which has sparked a lot of talk on social media. What does this mean?
Well, I think he's certainly one of Zimbabwe's best and brightest, and he's a great entrepreneur. He basically, Zimbabwe enjoys more than 100% penetration in mobile telephony, thanks to his entrepreneurship. So I think it's richly deserved, and I think over the next 10, 15 years, Zimbabwe should aspire to create an environment in which we produce tens, if not hundreds, of entrepreneurs that go on to do as well as he has done.
So, is he the only one? Okay, so he makes this list because apparently he's one of the richest people in the UK, and apparently it's a big deal that he's the first black person to make it on the list. Is he the only billionaire this country has produced? Okay.
No. I think one off. In fact, on the list is a gentleman called Nicholas Roditi that a lot of people may not be aware of, but he's a Zimbabwean. And he was part of George Soros' Quantum Fund. He was actually the fund manager in the early 90s. And he made quite a
He's one of the guys who bet against them. Sterling?
Absolutely.
The Queen can't like him very much.
I'm sure. He's worth about £2 billion. And he's actually on the list. And he's actually invested quite a bit in Zimbabwe. I think there's a solar power station that he has invested here. And he's still very much involved in what's happening in Zimbabwe.
So from 2 billion, he's remembered to share a couple of million with us?
Well, depends how you look at it. But he's not the only one. You had Tiny Roland at some point in the 70s. And at the time, he had the 15th largest corporation, Lonro. And before that, I think we have...
But didn't Tiny Roland and Lonro all end in tears?
Absolutely. But that's why they publish this every year, because there's a lot of shuffling that goes on the richest list. But I think it's worth mentioning that we've had quite a number of very rich and very wealthy people that have been on the British list. We have also, the Willoughbys, Sir Willoughby, quite in the early 1900s. That was...
There's a big shareholder on the stock exchange called Willoughby Investments.
Yes, I believe that's it's now part of Tiny Roland. It merged with Tiny Roland's company, Lonro, and that is what is termed Lonro. But the original shareholding was set up in 1891, and I think by 1894 they had over 1 million hectares of land in Zimbabwe. So they own quite a bit of land in Zimbabwe. And obviously, you have people like Alfred Byte and Cecil Rhodes himself was.
I mean, this is all a long time ago.
It's context.
In our generation, have we created billionaires?
So first of all, I think is we need to provide context. And the context for me from Strive, the way I look at it is it shows that Zimbabwe does punch above its weight class. We must agree. To produce a billionaire with an economy that is worth 15, 16 billion dollars that has gone through what it has gone through, I think it's worthy of mentioning, and it's worthy of the Zimbabwean entrepreneurial class that is there. We know that it's not easy being an entrepreneur, but we've had this success, and I think it's worth noting. So I wanted us to first contextualize from where we're coming from. Maybe Rufaro can explain more entrepreneurs in present day.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you're saying about Strive. I think it's important to mention.
Funny how we always think we can call him Strive, like he's our best buddy.
So he made it to this rich list. He's a billionaire. But if we unpack that number, how much of it is attributable to Zimbabwe? And what does it tell us that our most famous entrepreneurs are individuals who did well initially in Zimbabwe, but then transcended our borders and expanded the operations to other nations and created even more value outside the country.
Is that true, though? I'm thinking of someone like Zed Kujinaris and his partners at Innsbruck. They've made most of their money here. And in fact, whenever they've tried to go out of the country, it seems to have ended in tears.
Well, they didn't do well in the spas in Zambia, but they've done extremely well with the fast food business, which is now Simbisa. They're huge in Kenya, which is a bigger market than Zimbabwe. They have a significant presence in Zambia. So I think they've done well. They've built a Pan-African business that transcends Zimbabwe. And I think if we apply our minds to the bankers that did extremely well in the late 90s and 2000s, Bank ABC, which is part of, which was taken over by an international group, was built by Doug Munatsi and his partners. And it's the same narrative of an entrepreneur doing extremely well in Zimbabwe, but then finding that their talents could be useful outside our borders and build a Pan-African business.
But is that a problem of Zimbabwe per se, or a feature of a small landlocked country? So in my head, I'm thinking of the Netherlands. The Netherlands has produced multiple billionaires, has produced multiple champions in various industries around the world. But because it's a small country, not even landlocked, most of that money has been made abroad. In fact, a lot of their managerial class and their entrepreneurial class lives abroad. Because it's a tiny country, they're not going to make a lot of money at home.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying, and I think that's so it speaks to the league of entrepreneurs per se, to some extent. That there are some who will do well in Zim, and that is the be-all and end-all of their ambitions and abilities. And some will do well and find that they have the energy and capacity to do well elsewhere, notwithstanding that they might not have the same natural advantages in different jurisdictions. So if you live and work in Zimbabwe, you have friends and family here, you have networks. It should be easier for you to get an audience with a minister or somebody important in your own country. It should be easier to do it in your own country than as a foreigner. So what I'm saying is, if you succeed in Zimbabwe and then replicate that success outside Zimbabwe, I think that puts you in a different league of entrepreneur than the entrepreneurs who have just done well here and ended and never expanded beyond our borders.
Okay. A lot of thoughts in my head. But okay, why are we even having this discussion? Why does it matter how many ultra wealthy people this country has produced? Does it matter?
Absolutely. And I would look at it this way. When you look at any economy, there are two things that need to be there for a country to develop. And one of which is entrepreneurship, the other is capital. And what is most useful is entrepreneurial capital. So capital that actually looks for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are they're the only components in development that actually lead to economic development.
I think
So-
China would disagree.
No, China is producing a lot of entrepreneurs, billionaires.
But it was kickstarted by the state.
It was not kickstarted by the state. I think that is a misnomer. People always look at that. I think the nature of states is always to project themselves as be all and all knowing, when the reality is far different from that. I think when you look at entrepreneurship, the point I wanted to make, and as a continuation of the theme that Rufaro started, is that entrepreneurship, in its essence, is like wild mushrooms. You never know where they're going to grow. All you need to do is to water, and you cannot, you don't know what's going to happen. So what tends to happen is certain countries have a high concentration of entrepreneurs, and then certain countries have a high concentration of capital. And I think that in Zimbabwe, we must agree that there is some sort of concentration of entrepreneurs. It's a very unique
Do you agree?
proposition.
Yes, I think sadly, out of necessity is the mother of invention, and we have extremely high unemployment. So people have to make a plan to put food on the table, and that's why in this country, side hustles are normal for most people. And
Is that entrepreneurship? I mean, most of these people are like getting on a bus and going to South Africa, buying something from Mr. Price and trying to sell it to their workmates at double the price. Is that entrepreneurship?
That's how it starts. So strictly what entrepreneurship is and the theory of entrepreneurship, and we can get into that, but I don't think on a Friday night we should get into the theory. But certainly that's how it starts. There are certain people who are very good at the hustle, right? And it's from the hustle that we build on, where your entrepreneurs start coming up. Coincidentally, if you read through the Strive story, he was hustling, right? He wanted to build a house, and it cost so much, and he could only get so much from the bank, so he had to hustle. So for him to become Telco's guy, that was eventually how he turned out. But how he started off as a hustle. If you look at Japan and you look at Mitsubishi, all the big motoring companies that we find in Japan, they all started as hustling. So I think it's part of it. It's not entrepreneurship, but it's certainly that's where we get really good entrepreneurs. They start from just the very basic hustle.
So it's a good thing that Zimbabwe is tough. It's a good thing that we're suffering, and we must keep it that way if we want to grow the number of entrepreneurs.
No, not necessarily. I think it's a good thing that we have a population that is literate, well educated, and is capable of hustling. I think that we can certainly do better. Our aspiration should be to have hundreds of individuals who build businesses as large and successful as Econet over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
So how do we do that? How do we? Okay, so you say we've had a couple of billionaires. This Rojiji guy, Strive, and maybe Cecil Rhodes, and that's it. No history. You mentioned the Willoughbys. How do we increase this number? Okay, so I mentioned the Netherlands. We probably have a similar population, and I'm sure they've got a lot more billionaires than we do.
Absolutely. So how we do it is, first of all, recognizing that Zimbabwe is pretty unique in terms of entrepreneurship. So we actually need to recognize it as a society. So just simply recognizing that the hustle is okay, and that entrepreneurs come out of Zimbabwe, and it's something that is very unique. We just need to recognize it. Then the second thing that we probably need to do is to build an ecosystem around it. Like I say, the missing thing in Zimbabwe are capitalists who are entrepreneurial. So capital that is entrepreneurial. When you look at the capital structure and the capital markets, and I think Rufaro can speak into this, you tend to find that it's heavily tilted towards big corporates. If you look at the auction system in Zimbabwe, it's all heavily tilted towards big corporates. So we still need the entrepreneurial capital that can identify the entrepreneurs, and that's the only way we can build.
Do we have capital of any sort in this country? I mean, what's the total? I mean, you know these numbers before. Yeah. What's the total? What's M3 right now? What's the total money in circulation?
200 billion.
Okay, in real money.
In real money, that's about
in US dollars.
Let's call it 1.5.
1.5 billion dollars. Yeah. How much cash does Microsoft have? Or Apple?
Oh, that's tens of billions. Or hundreds of
do
millions.
We have capital?
No, we do have capital. I think so. You know, if you think about the way our capital markets are structured, the pension funds in this country have to own prescribed assets, and these are typically government treasury bills. And what happened between 1998 and 2008 is a massive wealth transfer between savers and pensioners, who are on the losing end of this transfer, and the government, which basically printed value into oblivion. So today, those prescribed assets are typically government paper like treasury bills. And what it really, which doesn't, which ends up basically on the expense side of the national account. But what we should really be doing with prescribed assets is to say, we need to be funding potentially the next Strive Masiwas, the next Zeds, and that should go into venture capital. We should be funding entrepreneurs who have ideas that want to build businesses, potentially industries that can transform this country in the same way that Econet did. So the capital is there. You know, we have capacity. The question is,
we constantly destroy it.
What
into the fiscal deficit? That's what you say.
Absolutely. I think that $1 in the hand of an entrepreneur is 100 times better than $1 in the hands of a government bureaucrat.
To build on that, people, often look at
be very polite. Friday drinks, feel free.
There's a concept in economics called crowding out. This is where government comes in, the little capital that's there, and it takes most of it. And that is what has happened in Zimbabwe. So if you read through from 1965 to present day, you have this big state government that has continuously crowded out capital. So instead of that dollar going to the entrepreneur, as Rufaro alluded to, we end up funding the government. And the problem with funding the government is its numerous deficits, and that money goes nowhere, and it's highly inefficient. So what we need to do, I mean, I asked this the one time, how many companies or how many state enterprises have been privatized in the last 3 years or 4 years?
But the hours, why should they be privatized?
Well, it depends.
Actually, that brings up something quite interesting, because when Econet was founded, it was frustrated by rules and regulations, and you had an entrepreneur with very limited resources, without the capacity to print money, that needed to make payroll and pay creditors to keep his business alive, right? And then you had a state monopoly enter the game and become a competitor. And they were licensed first. They had a head start. They had access to more capital. And if we,
but we're socialists.
If we run the story to the end, to the present day rather, right? Look at Econet, look at Net1 and Tel1. Who has more customers? Who has more market share? Which business is more profitable? Which business has had a bigger impact on the lives of Zimbabweans? So that experiment that we ran between a private telecoms company and a state-owned telecoms company tells us that the private sector is much more efficient and is more likely to get the job done than a state-owned enterprise.
But we also ran the same experiment between a private bus company and a state-owned bus company. Well, several private bus companies and a state-owned bus company. And the end result was the same. Where's Chawasarira? Where's Fukurakurerwa? Where's Ushandra Pamwe? Matemai, that was what the bus company was called. Where any of them?
You're actually making the point for private enterprise. Because what you're saying is, if a state-owned company makes a loss, that loss is shared by the whole of society. If a private enterprise makes a loss, that loss is privatized. And that's why you need the economy in the hands of entrepreneurs, in the hands of the private sector. Because what you tend to do is you concentrate the losses to the individual and not to the country. So when Zupco makes losses, when a GMB makes losses, we share those as a society.
How do we share them?
Well, it creates a debt. The deficits go into a debt, and that debt is public debt, and it's
debt assumption bill.
Absolutely. That's how we end up paying. So the interesting bit is you've had people.
I still want my tractor.
You've had people who argue that what if we commercialize and what if state-owned enterprise is profitable? And I say I have a problem with that.
Star FM versus Power FM.
Well, it's still a cost to the public, because if a state enterprise is making profit, it means it's charging more than it should. Because that's why you need competition, right?
Yeah, but
you need competition.
Just charges for adverts, and you can choose whether to go to
But
ZFM or to
ZFM. Imagine if you had thousands of radio stations. Would Star FM be charging as much as they do at the present moment?
I don't know.
Well, they wouldn't, right?
Actually, how much they charge.
If you look at the losses of GMB, would those losses be sustainable if it was a free market? Because remember, the view and the value in entrepreneurs, it's actually in making the most with the least. Now, a state enterprise has a different opposite view, which is making the least with the most.
Interesting. Okay.
So I just want to.
Sorry, because I want you to come in here. If you take Tinashe's argument, it actually clashes with yours, because your argument is let's force pension funds to give their money to entrepreneurs. So isn't that behaving just like the state?
No, I think it's not behaving just like the state. I think that firstly, we shouldn't force them to make any particular kind of investment. They should have. It should be investing in entrepreneurs should be an option with prescribed asset status, just as well as investing in government paper. So if I'm running a fund and I'm not interested in funding entrepreneurs, I can continue to buy treasury bills to meet my prescribed asset quotient. But I should have the option, if I believe that I'm going to get a higher return from an entrepreneur, I should have the option of using those funds to invest in entrepreneurs. Because if that entrepreneur succeeds, his business is going to grow, he's going to contribute more to the fiscus and taxes, he's going to contribute to the growth of the economy because his business is going to have a supply chain that will grow with it. So Econet is a great example of that. Econet has tens of thousands of agents that would otherwise be unemployed if it didn't exist. And the country is better off.
They've killed them all with EcoCash. But anyway, that's a story for...
yeah. So, I mean, I think maybe it's important to just zoom out a little bit and just look at why do we actually care about entrepreneurs beyond the individuals and their stories, however interesting those may be. Why is it important? So if you look at the global economy, and I think we can all agree without controversy that the Industrial Revolution was a big deal. It ushered in a massive transformation, a massive eradication of poverty, and people like to focus on the technology that made the industrial possible. James Watt and the steam engine, and the mechanization of cloth production. But one of the things that made the Industrial Revolution possible, that's very important, is the fact that you had this innovation in law where you have a company with limited liability. So all of a sudden, an entrepreneur could get a bunch of people together as shareholders and take risks with the comfort that they could only lose the amount of money they put into the project. Because before that, if you set up an enterprise and you for profit and it didn't work out and you ran up some significant debt, all the directors and shareholders were liable to the extent of the debt. So this, companies with limited liability really supercharged the Industrial Revolution. And so it's entrepreneurs, they are the magic source in free market capitalism. That's why capitalism has done so well on the global stage. And we really need to look at our environment and figure out how to make it more amenable to the emergence of entrepreneurs.
Sorry, the producer is telling me we've got it in just now, but I just want to shift the discussion a little bit. If I want to ask Rufaro a question, then I want to come back to Tinashe and ask you to pick the next Zimbabwean billionaire and place a bet. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it while Rufaro is talking about this. So our publisher ZFN today had an article by Anonymous on the importance of title. Would you like to link that back to this discussion and to the argument you've just been making?
Absolutely, because property rights are important to risk takers and to investors, because Tinashe might be a brilliant entrepreneur with a great idea that can create phenomenal returns, but if it needs to be funded by people outside the country and they have concerns about his capacity to hold on to title, if his project needs a large piece of land, for example, then he's less likely to raise any money, because the first question his prospective investors are going to ask is, what happens if you fall out of favor and somebody decides that land should be occupied by someone else? What happens to our investment? And he won't have any good answers in this current dispensation. But if he says, look, I've got a title deed, and the Constitution says nobody can expropriate it from me without really good reason, that would be satisfactory.
Food for thought. Your bet, and I'm going to come back to you for your bet for the next billion days.
I'm not a central planner, and like I said, let the markets be, let people be, and that's the only way.
Just looking at the environment today, we've got a few people doing
we don't know, and I think that's the problem we have in Zimbabwe is we have people who think that they have superior knowledge, who think that they know better than everybody else. The thing is, no one could have predicted Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, any of these great entrepreneurs. The fact that we know is that Zimbabwe, for whatever reason, and I'm a believer that entrepreneurship is also about personality, so I think that entrepreneurs are born. So for whatever reason, there's a high concentration of entrepreneurs in Zimbabwe or with Zimbabwean citizenry, because we have a lot of Zimbabweans who now live outside of Zimbabwe. So we're going to see a lot more of them. And what I think would propel and what we should really be focusing on, and the missing link in Zimbabwe at the present moment, is that we do not have capital that is entrepreneurial. So we do not have entrepreneurial capitalists. Because if we had entrepreneurial capitalists, you find more and more of that money looking for entrepreneurs. But what we have is capital. First, that's crowded out by the state enterprise because it's insatiable. Government's need for money is insatiable. But second, we have people within the.
I think you're making your own question now, right?
No, I'm not.
You're
I'm
answering your
actually
own
building.
He's not telling you. He's not betting anyone.
I'm not betting
He wants
on
to.
anyone.
This
I'm
happens
saying-
often, and it's remarkable that he's only drinking Pepsi Light. Anyway, I'm willing to make a bet. So I think, and I'll use Econet as an analogy, because before Econet, Telkom's penetration in this country in terms of fixed lines was less than 30%, and it was incredibly difficult to get a line. And I think today, one of the trends that I see, and I think this is where the next Zimbabwean billionaire will likely emerge, is in distributed solar, because the state has failed to make electricity reliably available to everybody who needs it at a good price. And I think that the future of energy,
I can disagree.
especially in
You had your chance.
especially especially in a sunny place
I'm going
like
to get fired by the producer if I don't let you guys shut up. Thank you very much for joining us on another Friday evening. We hope we inspired some thoughts in your head. We don't really take ourselves very seriously. Don't take us too seriously either. We hope that in the process of listening to our discussion, it triggers some thought, triggers some discussion. And as these discussions happen in various parts of the country, we become a better nation. Have a lovely weekend. Be good. Stay safe. And if you can't be good at it.